What happens when nuclear power plant 40 miles from New York City experiences cooling system failure that plant operators don't immediately recognize as catastrophic, when radiation levels start rising inside containment building but monitoring systems haven't triggered full emergency protocols yet, and when only early warning that could prevent 8 million people from being exposed to dangerous radiation comes from black Trans Am driving past facility with sensors sophisticated enough to detect leak before official systems register severity. This is story of June 12, 1988, and why reason New York City wasn't evacuated in panic, but in controlled order, why thousands didn't receive radiation exposure that would have caused cancers for decades, was because David Hasselhoff happened to be driving near Indian Point nuclear power plant when KIT's radiation sensors detected levels that shouldn't exist outside reactor containment building. June 12, 1988, Sunday morning, Indian Point Energy Center, Buchanan, New York. 40 miles north of NYC on Hudson River. Facility had 3 nuclear reactors, 2 operational in 1988, supplied approximately 25% of New York City's electricity, one of most important power facilities in region, also most controversial because proximity to largest population center in America, 8 million in NYC, millions more surrounding areas, all within 50 miles of nuclear reactors. At 9:23 a.m., pump-in secondary cooling system of Reactor 2 experienced mechanical failure. Backup pump activated, but valve in backup system had been left partially closed during maintenance 3 weeks earlier. Not fully closed, that would have been obvious. Partially closed. Enough water flowing that system appeared functional, but not enough to actually cool reactor adequately. Over next 40 minutes, temperature inside reactor core began rising, slowly at first. Monitoring systems showed increase, but within parameters explained by normal fluctuations. Operators saw readings, noted in log, weren't alarmed because backup cooling appeared functioning normally. What they didn't know, partially closed valve, meant cooling water flow only at 60% of required capacity. By 10:05 a.m., reactor core temperature risen 15 degrees above normal. Operators paying closer attention, ran diagnostics. Everything showed green. Didn't know about partially closed valve because wasn't part of automated monitoring. At 10:17 a.m., temperature alarms activated, core now 23 degrees above normal. Operators initiated emergency cooling procedures, increased water flow to maximum, but because of valve, maximum capacity still only 60% of what needed. At 10:28 a.m., containment building radiation monitors detected elevated levels. Radioactive steam escaping from reactor cooling system into containment building. Serious but not immediate public threat. Containment designed to hold radiation. Operators declared site area emergency, second highest classification, notified Nuclear Regulatory Commission, prepared emergency protocols, but still believed they had time before public threat. What they didn't know, containment building had small crack in ventilation system seal, damage from maintenance not properly repaired. Radioactive particles escaping containment, being released into atmosphere. Not massive release, not Chernobyl level, but enough that if continued for hours, people downwind would receive measurable radiation exposure, and wind that morning blowing south toward New York City. 8 million people potentially in path. David driving south on Taconic State Parkway, returning to NYC after visiting Poughkeepsie Hospital. Beautiful June morning. KIT systems in normal operation, monitoring traffic and roads. KIT also had radiation detection sensors, originally for detecting dirty bombs in urban environments, sophisticated enough to measure background radiation and detect anomalies. At 10:31 a.m., KIT's sensors registered unusual reading. David, detecting elevated radiation levels, current reading 12 microsieverts per hour, normal background 0.1 microsieverts. This represents 120-fold increase. David focused. Radiation, where from? Analyzing. Source appears west-northwest, approximately 3 miles. That location corresponds to Indian Point nuclear power plant. Is this normal near a plant? Negative. Even in proximity to operating facilities, external radiation shouldn't exceed normal background by more than minimal amounts. Current readings suggest radioactive material being released into atmosphere, detecting cesium-137 and iodine-131 isotopes, both consistent with nuclear reactor fuel. David knew those isotopes shouldn't be detected outside plant. Is it getting worse? Radiation continuing to rise, now 15 microsieverts per hour and increasing. At current rate, levels will reach potentially dangerous exposure thresholds within 2 to 3 hours. Wind patterns show radioactive material carried south toward New York City. I need to contact someone. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is federal oversight. However, immediate emergency response would be New York State Emergency Management. I can connect you to State Emergency Operations Center. Do it. Kit established connection. Emergency operator answered. New York State Emergency Operations, how can I help? This is David Hasselhoff. I'm driving near Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. My vehicle's radiation sensors detecting elevated levels, 12 to 15 microsieverts per hour, and rising, detecting cesium-137 and iodine-131 isotopes. This suggests radiation leak from plant. Pause. Sir, can you repeat that? Yes, my vehicle has radiation detection equipment. I'm 3 miles from plant, detecting levels 120 times normal background. You need to check if there's incident at facility. Sir, we haven't received any public emergency notifications from Indian Point. They're required to notify immediately if there's any release affecting outside areas. Then either they don't know yet or haven't recognized severity. I'm telling you there's radioactive material in air right now being carried south by wind. You need to contact plant and verify their status. Operator put David on hold. Minutes passed. Kit continued monitoring. David, radiation now 18 microsieverts per hour. Rate accelerating. Estimate levels will reach 50 microsieverts within 90 minutes if release continues. At that exposure level, affected areas should be evacuated or sheltered. Operator returned. Mr. Hasselhoff, I've contacted Indian Point. They confirmed site area emergency cooling system issue in Reactor 2, but they indicated radiation contained within containment building, no public threat. Then their monitoring systems aren't detecting what mine are. I'm measuring radioactive isotopes in open air 3 miles from plant. That means radiation escaping containment. Send someone with detection equipment to verify my readings independently. Sir, that would require mobilizing emergency response teams. We can't do that based on unverified civilian reports. Then verify it. Send one vehicle with radiation detector to my location. If I'm wrong, you've wasted 30 minutes. If I'm right and you don't act, you're going to have radiation exposure incident affecting millions. Which risk would you rather take? Another pause. Stay at your current location. We're dispatching hazmat team with detection equipment. ETA 15 minutes. David pulled over. Kit continued monitoring. 22 microsieverts per hour. Wind steady from north-northwest, carrying radioactive plume south, toward Westchester County, toward Bronx, toward Manhattan. If continued for hours, everyone downwind would receive measurable radiation exposure, not immediately deadly, but enough to increase cancer risk for hundreds of thousands. 15 minutes later, NY State Emergency Management vehicle arrived. 2 technicians with portable radiation detectors. Skeptical at first, civilian reports usually false alarms, but when activated detectors, skepticism vanished. Equipment showed same thing. Kit sensors showed elevated radiation, cesium-137, iodine-131, 24 microsieverts per hour, and climbing, radioactive material in open air being carried south. Lead technician immediately radioed supervisor. We have confirmation of radiation release from Indian Point. Civilian report accurate. Measuring 24 microsieverts per hour, 3 miles south with reactor fuel isotopes detected. This is public health emergency. Within minutes, emergency response escalated dramatically. NY State Emergency Operations Center activated full nuclear emergency protocols. Nuclear Regulatory Commission notified with confirmed radiation readings. Governor's office briefed. Indian Point contacted with external radiation data, ordered to provide complete information on reactor status immediately. At plant, operators stunned. Their monitoring hadn't shown radiation escaping containment. When checked containment ventilation systems manually, found cracked seal, allowing radioactive steam to vent directly to atmosphere. Once knew what to look for, realized severity. Reactor core still overheating because of partially closed valve. They'd been fighting problem over hour without recognizing radiation already escaping. Plant declared general emergency, highest level activated full emergency shutdown. But shutting down reactor takes time. Even in emergency mode would take hours. During that time, radiation would continue being released. Only way to stop release: fix seal while reactor still operating. Dangerous but necessary. Decision facing state officials: evacuate areas downwind or shelter in place. Evacuation meant moving hundreds of thousands quickly, could cause panic and traffic chaos. Shelter in place meant telling people stay indoors with windows closed, would reduce exposure, but only worked if people complied. State's nuclear emergency plan called for 10-mile evacuation zone, but wind patterns showed plume carrying south, not circular. Areas most at risk directly downwind: parts of Westchester County, potentially northern Bronx. Time critical. Current radiation levels weren't immediately dangerous, but if release continued for hours, cumulative exposure would reach concerning levels. State Emergency Director made call: shelter in place for areas within 10 miles downwind. Voluntary evacuation for anyone wanting to leave. Prepare for mandatory evacuation if levels continued rising. At 11:15 a.m., emergency broadcasts went out across radio and television in Westchester County and northern NYC. This is emergency alert. Indian Point nuclear power plant experiencing radiation release. Areas downwind advised to shelter in place immediately. Go indoors, close all windows and doors, turn off ventilation systems. Do not go outside unless absolutely necessary. This is not drill. Repeat, shelter in place immediately. For millions enjoying Sunday morning: alert terrifying, nuclear emergency, radiation release, shelter in place. Words nobody wanted to hear, especially after Chernobyl 2 years earlier. But because alert went out early, before radiation levels became dangerous, people had time to respond calmly. Went indoors, closed windows, turned on news, waited for updates. If alert had come 3 hours later, after radiation building up for hours without anyone knowing, panic would have been much worse. At Indian Point, plant engineers worked frantically, had to repair containment seal while dealing with overheating reactor. Team in protective gear entered containment building, applied emergency sealant to cracked ventilation seal. Not permanent fix, but stopped radiation from venting to atmosphere. Meanwhile, other engineers finally discovered partially closed valve in cooling system and opened it fully. With proper cooling flow restored, reactor temperature began dropping. By 1:30 p.m., reactor stabilized and radiation release stopped. External monitors confirmed radiation levels dropping as radioactive plume dispersed and no new material being released. By 3 p.m., all clear given, shelter in place lifted, radiation returned to near normal, crisis over, but analysis began immediately. How much radiation released? How many exposed? Data showed that because of early warning and quick shelter-in-place order, actual public exposure minimal. Most people gotten indoors before plume reached populated areas. Radiation that did reach residential areas at levels causing negligible health impact because exposure time limited. Radiation safety experts calculated, without early warning, if people remained outside and release continued another 3 hours, tens of thousands would have received exposure levels high enough to measurably increase cancer risk. Early detection prevented public health disaster. 2 weeks later, David received letter from Governor of New York thanking him for quick action, emphasizing early detection gave authorities time needed to protect public safety. Nuclear Regulatory Commission sent own letter acknowledging civilian radiation detection identified release before plant monitoring systems, leading to questions about Indian Point's detection capabilities that resulted in significant safety upgrades. Incident sparked intense debate about Indian Point's proximity to NYC. Critics argued plant 40 miles from 8 million people, unacceptable risk. Supporters pointed out safety systems ultimately worked and no one harmed. But everyone agreed incident far too close to major disaster. For David, incident proved something. KIT's advanced technology wasn't just for catching criminals or rescuing individuals. Sometimes could detect threats that even specialized facilities with dedicated monitoring equipment missed. Radiation sensors picked up release before Indian Point's own systems recognized radiation escaping containment. That early detection gave authorities 90 minutes advance warning, enough time to issue shelter-in-place orders before radiation reached populated areas. Difference between people getting exposed and people getting protected was those 90 minutes. And those 90 minutes existed because Black Trans Am happened to be driving past at right moment with sensors sophisticated enough to detect isotopes that shouldn't be in air. Investigation found multiple failures. Partially closed valve causing cooling problem. Cracked seal allowing radiation to escape containment. Monitoring systems that didn't detect external release. Indian Point fined heavily, required to implement comprehensive safety upgrades. Reactor shut down 6 months for repairs. Incident became case study in nuclear safety, taught at facilities worldwide as example of how multiple small failures can cascade into serious event, but also taught as example of how early detection and proper emergency response can prevent crisis from becoming catastrophe.
Because real story of June 12, 1988, wasn't that nuclear plant had radiation leak. It was that leak was detected early enough, and authorities responded quickly enough that millions were protected before ever in real danger. That's why NYC wasn't evacuated in panic. That's why there were no radiation casualties. That's why Indian Point remembered as near miss instead of disaster. Because sometimes best emergency response is one that prevents emergency from affecting public, and sometimes that response starts with civilian vehicle detecting something wrong before anyone else knows there's problem. KIT's radiation sensors found leak. David reported it to authorities. Officials verified and acted. Engineers fixed it. Public was protected. That system working. And that's why those radiation sensors installed in black Trans Am for detecting dirty bombs ended up saving countless people from radiation exposure that would have caused health problems for decades. Not because anyone planned for that specific scenario, but because when you have technology to detect threats and willingness to use it to help people, sometimes you prevent disasters that nobody else saw coming.